Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. A quorum being present, I'll call the meeting to order. And thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I think we're starting a meeting 4 minutes after 7. I believe that's a record in my 23 years here, so thank you very much for being on time. I'd ask you all if you could please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. A few things before we get started with the actual warrant. I'd like to ask if you could all turn off your cell phones or put them on vibrate. All non-voters should be in the section to my right over here, so if there's any non-voters over here, I would ask you to move to this section over here. All voters should have a yellow sticker. We have 3 articles this evening on the warrant, and all 3 of those will be drawn in random selection process in accordance with our bylaws. And just for your reference, all 3 articles require a 2/3 vote this evening, so I'd ask the tellers to be prepared on all 3 articles. If you wish to speak, please take one of the microphones at the front of the room. If you have a question or need an explanation, have any confusion at all, please raise your hand and ask. We'll be happy to explain anything you may have. Ahead of time, I'd like to thank the tellers for their work this evening. And maybe most importantly, this evening I'd like to wish the Wilmington High School girls soccer team good luck in tomorrow's state championship game. Go Wildcats. Greetings. In the name of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and in the manner prescribed in the bylaws of said town, you are hereby directed to notify and warn the inhabitants of the town qualified to vote in town affairs to meet and assemble at the Wilmington Middle School Auditorium, 25 Carter Lane, in said town of Wilmington on Wednesday, the 13th day of November, 2013 at 7 p.m., then and there to act on the following articles. Mr. Somaglia.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that the moderator dispense with further reading of the warrant and take up and make reference to each article by number.
Is there a second? Second. Motion's made and seconded. Discussion? Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. Voted. Is that my tub?
Yes, it is.
We're on Article number 2. To see if the town will vote to amend the zoning bylaws and associated Table 1 principal use regulations as follows. 1, by allowing personal service shop 3.5.10 to be permitted within the highway industrial to read as follows. And those are the different zones, ladies and gentlemen, and Mr. Sorrentino, I believe the change is in HI to yes. Or take any other action related thereto. Is there a motion, Mr. Sorrentino?
Yes, Mr. Moderator, I move that the zoning bylaws of the town of Wilmington, associated Table 1, principal use regulation, be amended as follows. By allowing personal service shop 3.5.10 to be permitted within the highway industrial to read as follows. R10, no. R20, no. R60, no. NB, yes. GB, yes. CB, yes. GI, no. HI, yes. LI/no. Site plan review required.
Thank you. And the only change to the existing bylaw would be the HI moving to yes. Is that correct?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Is there a second? Second. Motion's made and seconded. Finance Committee recommendation is approval. Planning Board recommendation is obviously approval. Discussion, Mr. Sorrentino.
This is just a house cleaning article. This is feedback from the commercial industrial people up and around the Belleville area. And Planning Board thinks it's a really good idea. This will help with that area.
Thank you. Yes, and just a reminder, I need all 3 motions this evening in writing. Thank you. Mr. Sorrentino, further discussion? We're ready for the vote? All those in favor of Article 2 as presented signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. Voted and done so unanimously. We're on Article number 1. To see if the town will vote to authorize the Board of Selectmen to acquire by purchase, gift, or eminent domain pursuant to General Law, Chapter 40 and General Law, Chapter 79, 6 parcels of real property known as 120 Main Street, located off Glen Road and Main Street, Wilmington, Massachusetts, containing approximately 7.86 acres, and being more particularly shown as lots 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 on that certain plan entitled Subdivision Plan of Land in Wilmington dated February 7th, 2008, prepared by Coco and Cormier Engineering Associates, Inc., and filed with the Middlesex County Registry, District of Land Court as Plan 24246B in the town's Planning and Conservation Department, and further to see if the town will vote to appropriate, borrow pursuant to any applicable statute, or transfer from available funds a sum of money for such purposes, or take any other action related thereto. Is there a motion? Mr. McCoy.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The meeting did start at 7 o'clock, right? I apologize running a couple minutes late. I move that the Board of Selectmen be authorized to acquire by purchase and by eminent domain pursuant to General Laws, Chapter 40 and General Laws, Chapter 79, 6 parcels of real property known as 120 Main Street, located off Glen Road and Main Street, Wilmington, Massachusetts, containing approximately 7.86 acres and being more particularly shown as lots 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, on a certain plan entitled Subdivision Plan of Land in Wilmington, dated February 7, 2008, prepared by Coco Cormier Engineering Associates, Inc., and filed with the Middlesex County Registry District of the Land Court known as Plan Number 24246B, and further appropriated from available funds free cash the amount of $1,725,000 for such purchase.
Is there first, the only change in the warrant, ladies and gentlemen, is the amount of $1,725,000. Is there a second? Second. Motion's made and seconded. Finance Committee recommendation? Approval. Is approval. Discussion? Mr.
Thank you,
McCoy.
Mr. Moderator. Just a brief history, and I'll be brief, Mr. Moderator. The town manager was contacted by a representative from the Archdiocese of Boston in February of 2013 to inquire about the town's interest in purchasing 7.86 acres of property next to St. Dorothy's Church. After selectmen met in executive session to consider the opportunity, the full board deemed the purchase of this property in the town's best interest and instructed Mr. Hull, our town manager, to attempt to negotiate a purchase price. Negotiations took place, which led to a price of $1,725,000, with the condition that the church needed a decision from the town prior to the 2014 annual town meeting. That's what brings us here tonight. An internal review of the property has determined that the property does not have wetlands and is buildable. Geo Insight, which is pretty much the consultant firm that helps us with all environmental needs, was hired to complete an environmental assessment of the property. Their assessment included a review of neighboring properties to identify potential sources of this off-site contaminants that might migrate to the property, along with a file review of the history of the church property. Additionally, Geo Insight established 3 groundwater monitoring wells to assist the soil and groundwater. Geo Insight concluded that the property does not present a risk from the standpoint of contamination. We've used Geo Insight in the past, Olin Chemical is an example. The fact that the town has nearly $14.2 million in free cash places the town in a positive position to seize this moment, because the property can be purchased in full in money that the town has basically a savings account of the free cash, so to speak. There will be no impact on property taxes by the purchase of this property. The focus right now is completing the new high school on time within budget. There is no immediate plan to begin development of the church property. In short, the purchase of this property is not about obligating the town to incur additional annual expenditures beginning today. Instead, it is about recognizing needs that exist and seizing an opportunity today to give a future town meeting, which are you folks here, the opportunity to consider an appropriate use for the property that will serve the residents in years to come. There was a developer that offered in excess of $2 million relative to this property. However, the church and the town is a better fit. In closing, I can't really look into a crystal ball and say what we're going to do. All I can say is it makes sense to buy this property, and I understand we just spent funds to appropriate for a new high school, and I don't believe, and I wouldn't be in favor of doing something this year, next year, the following year. I understand how the economy is, and the town is in a good position. I just think there's 3 words that comes to mind: location, location, location. This property's on Main Street, and I think it's to the town's best advantage to purchase this property for future use. I'm not going to look into a crystal ball. I know there's talk about, other items in the town's priorities, but I think it's a great opportunity to purchase this property. We have the money to do so, and I think it just makes common sense to do that. I really wish you'd support that. I support it. I think it makes a lot of sense. And once again, it's on Main Street. And how often do you get property available? And let's be honest, God's not making any property today, so I think it's in our best interest to do it. Thank you.
Further discussion? Mr. Sagal.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mr. McCoy, you said that it would have no impact on the property taxes. My understanding of the way the town runs is that our property taxes are impacted by the growth in the value of the properties in town. So if there's increased commercial building, if there's increased residential building, then there's new taxes that come into the town's budget, and that impacts the homeowners and what our future tax bills will be. Do you agree?
As I stated earlier, the funds are coming
Could, Mr. McQuaid, could you take a microphone, please? Thank you.
I apologize, Mr. Moderator. As I stated earlier, this funds is coming out of free cash that we have, and it's been approved by the Department of Revenue, $14.2 million. That money's coming out of there to purchase the property. Your tax rate is not going to go up at all. We have that money basically in a savings account, and that's what we're going to do. Like if you had a savings account and you want to purchase an automobile, instead of going to Sovereign Bank to get a loan, you have the money in the bank account to do it. You're not going for a loan. That's what we're not going for. We're not asking for a debt exclusion. We're not asking for 2.5 override. We have available funds to do this. Period. Thank you.
I appreciate your perspective on that, but my understanding of free cash is taxes that were collected in excess of the budget. So the free cash that the town has is previously collected taxes. If I have a savings account based on my earnings, based on money that I earned and I put in a savings account, it's different than money that I took from my tenants or children. It's a different event, okay? The free cash is tax dollars that were previously collected. That's my understanding of free cash. My thought is we have already spent money on the Entile Farm, which was a commercial property that came off the tax rolls. That will have a negative impact on whether our taxes go up or down. My personal perspective is when our taxes go up, it's a negative impact on me. When we have this opportunity for non-taxable land to be given to a developer, or be sold to a developer, and that will increase the tax base of the town, which will help to mitigate my own tax bill. I think it's a good fit to let people build a couple more McMansions in there and keep my tax bill low for another year. So my opinion on it is that we already have property that's been bought by the town and not yet developed. And there are several parcels within town. I understand that God's not making any more land, but neither is he making more land for houses and other people to move into town that could use it.
Further discussion? Oh, you've already gone, Mike. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, MJ Burns, 9 Pinewood Road. I just have a quick clarifying question, What is it currently zoned at, and what would that look, depending upon what the zone is, what could potentially move in and be built? I'm just out of curiosity.
Mr. Hull.
Thank you.
Most of the property is zoned R20. There is a fringe amount on one section of the property that is R10, but it's essentially residential.
Further discussion? Mr. McDonald.
Yes. Could we get a clarification from the town attorney as to whether or not there are any restrictions on the title? And I ask this question because I'm aware of other property in town that's owned by the Archdiocese where people have donated the land to the church and have put a restriction on it. For example, there's one piece that I know of that the property has a restriction that it has to specifically have built on it a school for religious education. And I'm concerned if this property that we're looking to buy has a similar restriction, and I was wondering if the title has been researched.
Mr. Foskett? Town council says he's not aware of any restrictions on the title.
Has he searched the title, or is he just not aware of it? Have you
Mr. Foskett?
I don't do title searches. Somebody in my office would do a title search if they're asked to do one. I don't
What?
do them.
Could you take the microphone, John?
The other concern I have is if there's been a 21E study done on this property. I realize that there's been some wells, but there's been trucks parking there, and
Mr. Hall?
There has been a environmental site assessment which involved going through and looking at the parcels in that area with respect to, there's a list that DEP posts that identifies properties that have been contaminated and are either active in terms of ongoing issues or have been closed. That review was conducted. In addition to that, they went on the property with the church's permission, looked at the property, did these groundwater samplings, and checked both the soil itself as well as the groundwater, and did not identify any issues that would raise concerns about contamination.
Thank you, Mr. Hall.
hello? Okay. I pretty much agree with Mr. Sagal that this money that is in the bank has come from the taxpayers. We see mega apartments being built in town. We see tremendous commercial development being built, but yet we don't see our taxes lowered as a result of that. As a matter of fact, we continue to see our taxes go up. And if the town purchases this property, we're not going to receive any tax revenue. I haven't heard anybody stand up and say what your planned uses for the property are. Maybe Mr. McCoy can address that. What do you plan to do with the property, Mr. McCoy?
Mr. Hull?
A couple of points. One, the thought that making this property available for residential development, the thought that that is going to lead to a reduction in taxes is not the case. If you look at and we've done an estimate of the number of homes that might go in there, somewhere in the range of 12 to 13 homes. Just taking an approximate value of those homes being in the $525,000 range, once they were all constructed, that would generate about $85,000 in additional revenue. On the other hand, if you assume that those homes are going to have children in them, just for sake of argument, 8 or 10 kids perhaps in those 12 or 13 homes, based upon the fact that the average cost of educating students is around $13,000. If you take 10 students, for example, that's a cost of $130,000. So yes, we'll bring in additional money, but there's also an additional cost to having students in the school system, which certainly isn't a bad thing, but there is a cost associated with that. With respect to uses, we have not identified a particular use at this time. We're really taking a similar approach to the one that was taken, if you recall, back in 1998 when the town purchased 4 parcels of property off of Wildwood Street. At the time, the thought was that the property might be available for potential cemetery expansion, recreational uses, or perhaps supplementing the property for a new high school. It took a number of years, but as it turned out, that property has come in very handy, as you well now know, because the high school is going to use that parcel for athletic fields. So We don't have a particular purpose right now. I can tell you there are a number of needs that the town has that should be addressed over the years. Those include additional, perhaps a space for a new senior center. Thanks to Terry Marciello's efforts, the senior center is very heavily used. Any of the seniors that have been there, I suspect, would agree that the space is at a premium there. That may be a potential use at some point down the line. I think also many folks would agree that the existing school administration being housed at the Roman House is not an appropriate use for that space, nor is it a conducive environment for the school department. One other possibility, one need I think the town has going forward is to have a school town administrative building. So those are just a couple of areas. Again, cemetery expansion continues to be an issue that we need to deal with. Not that I would envision necessarily this parcel being used for that, but with the various parcels that we have, we plan to take a look at all of these various needs and see how we can best utilize the property. This is a tremendous opportunity for the town. As Mr. McCoy, Selectman McCoy indicated, these opportunities don't come around all that often. In many cases, you don't plan for this necessarily, but what we have planned for is the financial ability to pay for this without borrowing and without raising taxes. So I would encourage you to vote for this.
Mr. McDonald?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion, but before I do that, I just have a couple more questions. My question is there a broker or a facilitator to this, Mr. Hull? In other words, do you have a purchase and sales agreement? Is the church getting $1 million and then this facilitator getting $750,000? Can you comment on that?
Mr. Hull?
I'm not aware of any broker being involved. It's, I believe, straight, we've been dealing specifically with the church, so they, it's my understanding, will receive the full amount of the funds.
And this particular article that's before us, it has nothing to do with any out-of-court settlements or anything like that, where money's being diverted or anything like that, Mr. Hull?
I haven't inquired as to the uses that they plan to make of this, these funds. My interest is in looking out for the town in terms of creating opportunities for a future town meeting to consider an appropriate use for this property, but I haven't asked the question what they intend to use the money for, and I'm not sure it's my place to ask that question.
You mentioned you had a motion. Mr. McDonald, your time's up.
Yes. I'd like to move that the town, meeting add a restriction to this article that says that the town shall not purchase this if there's a restriction on the title.
Is there a second? Hearing none, I'll rule that out of further discussion. Ma'am?
Yes, Joanne Chukas, 7 Cedar Street. If we have $1 million to spend, why aren't we developing the land on Cross Street? We paid $1 million for that. We were told athletic fields, tennis courts, all kinds of things for the kids. Now, if you don't develop it and you do, we're going to be taxed for the cost of developing it, and yet here we've got $1 million to spend, and I think it's very foolish to buy land when you don't know what you're going to do with it. I mean, if you have a reason for it, a direct reason, not a surmise or maybe down the road, you're not going to build a school there. We have enough schools. You're not going to build a town hall there. Put the old high school as a town hall, perfect place. But use this money to develop something we already have. You're letting it sit there and haven't done a thing with it. And I think you really should think about taking care of that before you buy more land.
Mr. Hull?
I'll defer to Selectman O'Connell.
Ms. O'Connell?
Thank you. I appreciate the question. I just wanted to use this opportunity briefly to update the residents here as to how we're doing at Cross Street. And as you would recall, in the last town meeting that we had, there was an appropriation that the residents saw fit to approve to allow the town to proceed forward with some design services. And as a committee, we've resumed in the fall timeframe, and we went through a process of developing a design criteria to be able to go out effectively through the central bidding process and put out an RFP. And in doing so, we had several responses. We're certainly subject to municipal finance guidelines, and there's certain time parameters that we must work within to be able to do that. Certainly, I'd like to compliment all of the department heads and all of the teams that they have on a day-to-day basis at Town Hall that take care of the town's business on behalf of this committee and other boards and other committees. And in doing so, we have gone through a very thorough process of going out to the community and asking for opinions, going through a town survey, which was online. We talked about this in the last town meeting. In addition, we met with several organizations and sports groups to go through a needs analysis, if you will, by team, by sport, at the youth level and all the way up through the high school. So we feel that we have a good grasp on the current inventory that we have for field space in the town, what the needs are. We also wanted to get some public opinion out there and also translated that through to the school system. And I'd like to commend Joanne Benton and her team for working that through to hear from the students as to how they would like to see the land developed. So moving forward, that RFP did go out, and we did receive responses, and we did meet as a committee, and we established a design criteria. We must do that as part of municipal finance. There's a very specific, deliberate process that's public. It's governed by law, and we need to follow certain rules and regulations. In addition, there are a lot of wetlands on the site, and we want to be able to maximize the use of those wetlands. So in addition, we're working on our open space plan with Carol Hamilton and her team. We're looking at additional grant sources and funding that might be available out there. We have to be very mindful of the wetlands in this process, and we may have an opportunity to fill in some created man-made areas. And in order to do so, based on the square footage of what we're attempting to fill in, we may need to engage the Army Corps of Engineers. So that's a very lengthy process. So moving forward, we have gone through and selected 2 design firms that we felt would be fitting and appropriate to call in and actually go through a formal interview process. I'm pleased to say that that took place last Thursday, and we spent probably from about 6 p.m. to about 10:30 at night, and we had a very detailed presentation and question and answers. It was a public open meeting that was posted for people to attend. And at the end of that, we were able to give a recommendation to the town manager to actually award the contract. So at this time, our town manager is actively engaged in that process with the design firm that we have selected based on the design criteria, the recommendation. And that is subject to reference review and also through to price negotiation. And at that point, we will be engaging with this firm. I will tell you that either firm, if we had chosen either one, we would be in great hands. But we feel that this firm presented itself and certainly appears to be the best fit for the town of Wilmington. So we are building momentum for this project. You will hear many more updates to come. This will be a very public process. The firm is very well trained in public forums, specifically public charrettes, and has been trained professionally through Harvard University. And you will hear a lot more updates. I think it's very important that people realize that we understand that many people have an opinion as to what the use of this land should be for and how it should be designed. It is very clear that people want it to be a multifaceted used parcel for both athletic and passive recreation. And we're trying to make it a land for all ages, for youth all the way up to our seniors. And we're also working on some collaborative partnerships with Textron. So there's many more updates to come, and I think it's very important that we develop this appropriately, strategically, and being mindful of the limitations that the site has. And I think in the next few weeks and in the coming months, you'll be very pleased with the updates that you hear publicly. Thank you.
Further discussion, Mr. West?
Yes, Frank West, 2 Birchwood Road. I rise in support of this article. I think it's a great opportunity for the town. And the thing that I'd also like to say is that in the short run, if we do nothing with the land other than own it, we're not dealing with any traffic concerns. If you're looking at the parcels right here along Glen Road, if they built houses, there's a chance that there could be accidents or things like that, and you're adding to the traffic. The other thing is that if somebody went to buy the Main Street property and have it rezoned, because everything else on Main Street is pretty much commercial, you'd end up with a lot more traffic than probably any town use. I'm assuming that if we're talking about a senior center or a future town hall,
again, you're not talking about that much traffic as opposed to if you wanted to put some sort of a drive-through concern and, another Dunkin' Donuts or something like that and just add to the traffic nightmare in our town. So I think that, just be brief, I think that it's a really good idea that the town purchased the land. And I think, like I said, in the short run, we'll be doing nothing with it. I think that, we'll, like Selectman O'Connor said, is that, like the Yentile Farm property, this here will go under whatever the reviews are at the time, probably 3, 4, 5, whatever years down the road. But in the meantime, we get to enjoy the fact that there's nothing there and nothing further impacting our traffic. Thank you.
Mr. Marchese.
Mr. McCoy, you said we have $14 million in free cash, and this is how we're going to pay for the property. Ms. O'Connell, you stated that's an ongoing review process for Yentile's Farm. It's long and drawn out, and we exactly don't know today what it's going to cost because of the lengthy process. And this property here on Main Street, I understand space is limited in town, and I do, in one part, agree that we should purchase the land because space is limited in town. But what concerns me is that we do have another project on the books, Yentile Farm, and we also have a high school, $80 million high school, that is in process right now. It's just in the building stages, and we don't know what the final outcome of that's going to be. We don't know if there's going to be change orders or issues or other things coming down the line. And Mr. McCoy, one thing you've always said about our free cash, it's something that we should hold on to for a rainy day. It's always good that we budget correctly, and we've been fortunate from the state in terms of local aid. Thanks to Representative Misselli and Gordon and Senator Bruce Tarr, we've been very fortunate in the last few years, and I think our free cash has doubled in the last, I believe, 4 years. Correct me if I'm wrong. And I think that's been great because the town's been very fiscally responsible. But what concerns me is that when Ms. O'Connell's done with her complete review and there's bigger issues at Yentile Farm that pops up to review. I'm not saying that there are, but we don't know because it's still an unknown. And then this property comes online and then we decide to develop it. Our $14 million of free cash may disappear because we don't know what's going to happen at the state. The economy shows no real signs of turnaround. We don't know if there's going to be cuts in local aid. That's the crystal ball, Mr. McCoy, that you mentioned that you can't see into, and none of us can see into. And I think that is the concern, the underlying concern. Do we all think probably this is a good idea? Yes, I would have to say so. I think it's a good idea to pay for it. But I think in the future, it's what's going to happen tomorrow. Are we going to have the $14 million in free cash, or are we going to be broke in 5 years? I don't know. And I don't think anyone in this room can honestly answer that question. Just something to think about.
Mr. Murray?
It's been a while. Jim Murray, 76 Salem Street. I've been coming to town meetings on and off for 40 years living in the town. I never thought I would say a senior center. Great. I'll turn 66 in February, so I went, yeah, senior. But when you talk about free cash and you talk about land itself, it's really kind of the same thing. You're land banking. You're buying something at a very reasonable price, and you're putting it aside for future use, whatever it be, a town hall or whatever. When you get a chance to get a bargain on something, what I think is a bargain, and believe me, I have fought on the other side for things that I thought we shouldn't be doing, but this is a no-brainer. Right on Main Street, at a good price, and for future use. You're not going to see condominiums. You're not going to see another Dunkin' Donuts there. It's really a no-brainer for the town. You've got money, to purchase it without increasing the taxes, and it's banked. It's banked for future use. Just like you put money in the bank, you put money into land too. Thank you.
Bob Boyce, 23 Allen Park Drive. Mr. O'Connell, you getting off track just a little bit. On the Yentile Farm and in the process, it's going to cost us a lot of money, and you're going to come back to the town meeting and ask us for money for this, I assume. I assume you're not going to take any of this free cash to build the Yentile Farm. Wouldn't it be better to take the $1.7 million and spend it, $1.7 million and spend it to that, and also fix up the town park? The baseball field there is atrocious, and we have a beautiful walking area in the town woods along there. I'd rather see it that than go out and buy something that we don't have any use for right now. Nothing in the foreseeable do we have any use for. Somebody mentioned the fact they're building a new school building. Well, you get the old Whitfield School. It's just about falling apart. And it would behoove us to look into building a school administration there as opposed to this. This is zoned, if I believe correctly, this is commercially zoned? Am I correct? What is it zoned for? Residents? If it got changed over to commercial, you wouldn't be adding more children there. You would be adding more tax revenue, and therefore you're lowering my taxes. I would rather see it go that route there than the route you wanted to go to at the present time.
Ms. West?
I wanted to try and move the question.
Okay, I don't see anybody else at the microphone, so hold on. I'm trying to avoid a vote here. Okay, good. Okay, I'd ask the people up the back, we're going to count this, so you need to be seated to have your votes counted. So anybody that wishes to vote needs to be in the seated area. The tellers will only count the votes of the people in the seated area, not up the back of the room. I'd ask the tellers to take their places. No, no.
No, there was nobody else
No.
to stand.
Yes, yep. Okay. Is everybody that wishes to vote in the seated areas now? Tellers ready? We're on Article number 1, the amount of $1,725,000. This requires a two-thirds vote. All those in favor of Article 1 as presented signify by rising at your place. Please remain standing. This is going to take a minute. Does someone have the cameraman up the top? Okay, you got it. Okay. Please remain standing. You tell me when they're all here. What are you doing? Is that everybody? Is that all the counters? 4. You good? Okay. Thank you. All those opposed to Article 1 as presented signify by rising at your place. One, two, where's the fourth one? Where'd the fourth counter go? 1, 2, 3. Where's the other one? Does she have all of them? Yep. Thank you.
She went out to check the quorum.
Did we get her votes?
I don't think she did.
Do you have them all? I'm sorry, folks, I'm going to need to take that, the no vote over again. One of the tellers was not there. All those opposed to Article 1 signify by rising at your place. I apologize. No. We're recounting the no votes. I need 4 slips from the tellers. All of the no votes. I need 4 slips from the tellers, even if it's a 0. Thank you. The vote is as follows: 197 in the affirmative, 9 in the negative. Motion passes with the required 2/3. And just a little pet peeve, Mr. Town Manager, if we have $14 million in the reserve fund, could we get some stickers that actually stick? Yeah, that's why we have 14 million, right, yeah, okay. Yeah. We're on Article number 3. To see if the town will vote to amend the zoning bylaw and associated zoning map of the town of Wilmington by voting to rezone from residential 60 to general business the following described parcel of land, or take any other action related thereto. The land known as 276 Lowell Street, Wilmington, Mass., Assessors Map 72, Lot 1, more particularly described as followed. The land with the intersection of the southeastern boundary of the land of Harley Jr. and Eleanor Toll with Lowell Street in said Wilmington, thence northerly by land of said Toll 180 and 12/100 feet, easterly by land of John Marshall 131 and 63/100 feet, southerly by land of John Marshall 180 and 0/100 feet, and westerly by said Lowell Street 125 and 0/100 feet to the point of beginning. Said premises containing 23,097 square feet of land as shown on a plan entitled Plan of Land in Wilmington, surveyed by John Marshall and Dolores Marshall, December 1961, H. Kingman Abbott, surveyor, said plan being recorded in the Middlesex North District Registry of Deeds in Plan Book 96, Plan 79A. Is there a motion, Mr. Brennan?
Mr. Moderator, Brian Corrigan, attorney at 20 Middlesex Avenue, Wilmington, on behalf of Mr. Brennan, and I would like to move
And are you a
approval.
voter, sir?
I am not.
Okay, if I could just have Mr. Brennan say, I move.
I move.
I move, and Mr. Brennan, does your motion contain as is in the booklet? It does, thank you. I'll accept that. Is there a second? Motion's made and seconded. Finance Committee recommendation? Is approval Planning Board recommendation? Is approval discussion? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, Brian Corrigan, attorney on behalf of Mr. Brennan, who's here with me tonight, the owner of the subject property. And I will just very briefly offer some information that may not be readily apparent on the face of the petition. And I'd like to direct you to the back page of the tonight's warrant, which contains an excerpt of Assessors Map 72. And as a wise person once said, a picture says 1,000 words. In this case, the map says 1,000 words. Mr. Brennan's property is the crosshatched property, Lot 1, at the top right corner of this particular map. And as you can see, Mr. Brennan is on Lowell Street, and he is essentially surrounded on 2 sides by another commercial property, which is the Lot 1B. That is the lot which is currently used for a shed sales facility. Lot 1A is the Burger King facility, And Lot 2C, I believe, is the property currently under development for a new restaurant. So Mr. Brennan is the lone residential lot in this particular area. He can see the writing on the wall in terms of the development coming down the street, and for obvious reasons, he would like to have his property rezoned general business to conform with the other lots that are abutting him, and essentially not be the lone house there when that property next to him is developed, which it could be at any time, regardless of whether it's combined with Mr. Brennan's lot or not. I would also like to point out one other item, which is that although I do not believe they are here tonight, Mr. Brennan's abutters to the west, the other residential lot, which is not shown on this particular assessors map, did sign his petition, and they are in support of Mr. Brennan's article. So with that, I ask the voters to approve this particular article tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Corrigan. Further discussion? We're ready for the vote. I see, oh, okay.
Paul Lyman.
Oh, Mr. Lyman, yep.
4 Meadow Lane, Wilmington. I'd like to urge the board to disapprove this motion. We have a horrendous traffic situation up there right now because of all the development that's going on West Street and the surrounding area. And we're fearful that if this were approved, it's just going to make it a lot worse. I don't know whether anyone here has ever tried getting from Lucci's to West Street. Any time of the day, the traffic is piled up there, and it's just going to get worse if this is approved. We feel like we're a bunch of orphans living in that area because we don't even have representation at our meetings. As you know, Precinct 3 doesn't have a rep here in Wilmington. We have our representative is from Burlington, and the only one who ever goes to any of these meetings and speaks on our behalf is Jim Maselli here. And he has helped us, but everything just keeps going on, and we're really fearful of this getting out of hand. And I'm wondering, has anybody ever gone down there and looked at the traffic situation as it exists now? If you take and ever read the police reports, you'll find accidents at the Burger King entrance, in and out, almost on a weekly basis. And now they're putting a restaurant right next to that, and that you're going to have 2 entrances and exits right side by side. That's going to exacerbate the problem. And the piece of property that they're looking to rezone right now will put a 3rd business area in that way, and we don't even know what's going in there. No one has ever indicated to us, and we've asked, what are the plans for this? Is it going to be residential? Obviously not. They're changing the zoning on it. Does anyone know what they're planning on putting in there?
Mr. Corrigan or Mr. Brennan?
Yeah, I addressed some of the comments very briefly.
Go ahead.
First, I just would like to acknowledge there's no doubt anyone who lives and/or works in the town of Wilmington knows that we have traffic issues here. This town is a major cut-through for other communities trying to reach the highways. Lowell Street may be the worst.
Mr. Corrigan, I hate to cut you off, but he's just looking for a specific,
Okay.
he had a specific question he asked.
There is no current plan for development. As far as we know, Mr. Brennan could not develop his property independently, commercially. So the plan would be to seek to sell the property to another developer, presumably somebody else who owns land in this area, to combine it. So, but the fact of the matter is, as I alluded to earlier, whether or not Mr. Brennan sells his property to the owner of Lot 1B, it doesn't make or break the buildable quality of Lot 1B. That property is 2.25 acres. That could be developed at any time commercially. The adjoining lot is Lot 1A, the Burger King lot. That's only 1.85 acres. So Mr. Brennan is just a very small piece of this puzzle here, and again, I hope that addresses some of your concerns, sir.
Mr. Lyman.
Well, it doesn't really address my concern. What we're interested in finding out is, do we know who's trying to purchase it? Do you have a potential buyer?
Mr. Corrigan?
There is no buyer, there's no offer, there's no understanding with anybody. Mr. Brennan has done nothing to entertain any sale of his land. Frankly, that'd be putting the cart before the horse. We're seeking the approval of the town tonight to rezone, and then we'll go out and we'll explore what his options are. But I can tell you that there is no offer or any agreement with anybody to sell this particular land or to develop it.
My property, Jimmy, is on the opposite side of the map here that doesn't show. We're on Lucci's side of Lowell Street. And when we were coming home tonight, my wife and I, in order to get to our house from Lucci's, we were in Lucci's Shopping Center, we had to go up Woburn Street, through the industrial park, then come in the back way just to get onto Suncrest Avenue up to our house. This is ridiculous. And it's going to get worse and not better if this zoning is changed. By disapproving it, you're not going to make this property unsaleable for this gentleman. He still can sell it. It's a good piece of property. But if it stayed residential, it's not going to make the traffic condition any worse. And I urge you to vote against it.
Thank you. Further discussion, ma'am?
Alyssa Randall, 14 Suncrest Ave, and I agree with this gentleman. And what my concern is, okay, he gets to sell his, change it to general business, and so that sets a precedent for the house next door, and also all the empty lots across the street sets a precedence for that people might want to do general business, and it can't handle the traffic. The traffic is horrible, going from Lucci's down to the satellites. That whole area it can't handle all that traffic. And so I am opposed to doing it.
Thank you. Ma'am? Yes, ma'am.
MJ Burns, 9 Pinewood Road. I think the concerns that I have with changing or rezoning this area is that the property value taxes for all the homes that abut that property could and possibly be affected, and with property values still not coming back as quickly as I'd like to see, it could really impact those. And I think it's a disservice to the residents in that respect, that they could have their values, possible values of their property threatened in that capacity just by this small rezoning piece. Thank you.
Further discussion? Mr. Murray?
I have one question, probably on taxes. Is the commercial rate higher than the residential rate?
Mr. Hull?
Yes, it is.
Then why would you want to transfer something residential to commercial when you don't have any desire to use the property for anything? It doesn't make any sense. There's no urgent need right at the moment. Nothing's coming forward. Why would you want to switch it and pay a higher price if you did not have something else in mind?
Representative Maselli?
Yeah, no one has asked the question, and I think it's the $64 question. Does the state have any plans for alleviating the serious traffic problem in that area? The state has plans, all right, but they're years off from becoming a reality in order to have some kind of a project going that would alleviate the traffic problem. So there's no immediate relief from the traffic situation that exists there now. So those people who think it's going to be exacerbated by rezoning this property, it absolutely will be. That's my humble opinion.
Yes, sir.
Dan Romanzo, 2 Glenview Road. I guess my question is, regardless of the sale of
It's even worse. The town, I know everyone wants money, they're all looking at money, but still, the town, I think it's time for them to sit back and say, we have to look at traffic, and traffic only, on any project that is being developed on these main thoroughfares.
Thank you. Mr. McDonald?
Yes, with regard to traffic, if anyone has been over near Revere or the Orient Heights section of East Boston, there's a cop that gets placed by an electronic device, and I brought this up at previous meetings, but the cop could actually regulate the light. For example, if traffic is not moving too fast on Lowell Street, but yet West Street doesn't have any traffic coming out of it, we have about 48 cops in town. There's no reason why that device couldn't be utilized in that area and allow traffic to flow better, along with other parts in town. But that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Mr. Marchese?
Mr. Moderator, am I allowed to ask a question to the planning board for their decision?
Yes.
Why they voted to approve this?
Certainly.
Just to the planning board, I'm just curious, since there are no future plans for this property on the books as of right now, I'm just curious why the planning board actually voted to approve it, because in the past, when properties like this have come up, and when there were no plans for development, the planning board outrightly said no to this type of development. But yet now, for this type of rezoning, where there is no future planning, they're now approving it. So I'm just wondering, why is it they say yes to this and no to others?
Mr. Sorrentino?
We like to view each proposal on their own merits, and we believe that this is a good idea for that location. That's all I can say.
Mr. Marchese?
Well, there is no real proposal going forward. All it is just rezoning. And the reason why I bring this up is that 2 years ago at town meeting, there was a similar piece of property that was right off the highway down near Ballardville, which was not near any other residential. There was 2 properties there that the homeowners wanted to convert to commercial for a future possible building. And the planning committees flat out said no because there was no plan, there was no builder, there was blah, 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 blah. But again, in this course, there is no plan, but yet they're approving it. So I just don't understand the planning board right now.
Mr. Sorrentino?
I would say that you're comparing apples and oranges. That particular property is in the middle of a residential area, and that was a horrendously bad area to rezone. This is in an area that is already quite a bit of general business district, so it's totally different thing.
Further discussion? Mr. Shampoo?
I'm probably going to, sorry, I'm going to end up probably repeating some of the things that are said here, but I heard someone say a moment ago, will this establish a precedent in this neighborhood for if we approve this particular parcel to be zoned commercial, does that open the floodgates, so to speak, and are we going to sweep down the street? And that doesn't, I would say just categorically no. Frankly, you get to decide in future town meetings what does or what doesn't get rezoned in the future. More importantly, the planning board has just said it's case-by-case situation. You look at each individual parcel, each individual request individually. And so we don't have to worry about so much, a sweeping, so to speak, of changing the entire region into commercial. It's case by case, property by property, parcel by parcel. I encourage you all to look at the map. This parcel is a small piece of what Mr. Corrigan brought to our attention a few moments ago. And parcel 1B is already there. It's the shed property. And it's 2.25 acres. And Mr. Brennan's parcel, parcel 1, is a small, tiny piece. What is that, about a half acre, I believe? If the shed company wanted to develop their 2.25 acres today, they could put a business there that would indeed probably add some traffic, whatever traffic is going to feed into that particular business, whatever that business is that gets set up there. But they could do that today. The addition of the half acre that Mr. Brennan's property takes up is not going to, in my opinion, dramatically increase the amount of traffic that comes in and out of that parcel. If you combined 1B and 1, it's really it's a small slice If you look at it, it's like a puzzle piece. It just makes sense. It doesn't mean we're going to take the next one down the line next year and make it commercial, and the one across the street and make it commercial. We all acknowledge, and I certainly respect and appreciate the observations of traffic challenges we all struggle with in this community. And I hope that over time, through the guidance of Mr. Maselli and Mr. Gordon and others, that we can come up with solutions at the state level that we can deliver to you to us at the town level. But in this particular case, I think that if we vote yes to allow Mr. Brennan to open up the possibility of selling his property to a commercial developer, that helps him out, and it doesn't have a negative impact on the town. And frankly, I think it will potentially have a positive impact on the complexion of that neighborhood, which I would say right now with the sheds, personally, whoever the shed guy is, I don't mean to insult you, I would like to see something nicer in that spot. And I believe that if we convert it to commercial, that could happen. I encourage you to support this article.
Ms. Shukas?
Yes. On that piece of property where that house is, many years ago, people there were approached by the people who own Lot 1B. They wanted to put a mini-mart out and back, but they did not have the frontage. And these people said, no, I don't want to move. So they sold their house and everything was put on hold. Now, if that house is sold, they now have the frontage to build out in that back lot. They did not have the frontage on Lowell Street because they were turned down at town meeting. They did not have the frontage to build. They needed more for access to Lowell Street. And that's what the value of that piece of property is.
Anyone hasn't spoken? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, can you hear me? Leslie Quick, 723 Woburn Street. I'm looking at this from an interesting perspective because I am a business owner who works on Lowell Street, and I live around the corner on Woburn Street. So I look at this in two ways. First of all, as a business owner, a commercial piece of property, I'm looking at this saying, if I was the owner of 1B, I would absolutely want that property because in my mind, even though it's not being said, I have a strong feeling that there is a purpose for this property. We just don't know what it is. That being said, from the business perspective, yes, you would want that commercial piece of property. I definitely think that 1B person wants the other piece, that residential piece, to make something more of it. As a living on Woburn Street, that traffic is getting worse, and I absolutely think that if 1B, let me just make sure I got this correct before I say anything. And I think that my personal opinion is that if that piece of property gets purchased, 1B, and yes, I do not like the sheds on that property, but that being said, if that piece of property gets purchased, it's going to become something much bigger. And if that happens, as a resident of Woburn Street, it's going to make my life a little bit more difficult. It's going to make Woburn Street even more of a cut-through than it already is. And I think that's going to be more difficult on residents. Thank you.
Anyone that hasn't spoken on this one? Representative Maselli.
Yeah, and I'll be brief. You know, I served on a local level for 15 years, Planning Board, Board of Selectmen, now serving a state level thanks to all of you. And I've always been cognizant of one thing. How do the abutters feel in the area? And what I hear, the abutters are opposed to it. They're not supporting it. They're up here talking about their own personal problems as far as wrestling with the traffic in that area. The state has plans, and the point I was trying to make is they're years in the offing. You know, you could call up tomorrow, and they'll tell you they're going to put that project on the go line probably in a year or so. But there's no immediate plans. The abutters, and I've heard them, and they're fighting over their own little piece of property and fighting the traffic every night. You got to listen to the abutters. That's how I feel, and that's why I'm going to vote against this.
Mr. Doherty?
I'd like to move the question.
Mr. Doherty has moved the question. He's asking to end debate, which would end debate and give the maker of the motion up to 10 minutes to address the body. Is there a second? Motion's made and seconded. This motion is not debatable. So everybody clear on what we're voting on. If you want to end debate and give the maker of the motion, which was Mr. Brennan, up to 10 minutes to address the body, you should vote yes. If you want to continue debate, you should vote no. Everyone clear? All those in favor of moving the question signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. voted. Mr. Brennan. Mr. Brennan, you'd like to yield to Mr. Corrigan? You can do that. Hold on. Mr. Corrigan is not a voter. After the question has been moved, you can only yield your time to a voter. Sorry.
I'd just like to waive further comment.
Okay, thank you. Ready for the vote? I ask the tellers to take their places. All those in favor of Article 3 as presented signify by rising at your place. Please remain standing. Thank you. All those opposed to Article 3 as presented signify by rising at your place. Thank you. Kills it. What's the vote? 126 to 64? So 180, 190 times 66.6%. Nope. Mr. Foskett?
We don't have a point.
The vote is as follows: 126 in the affirmative, 64 in the negative, total of 190 votes, which would require 127 to get a two-thirds vote. Motion fails for lack of a two-thirds. Is there, motion is made to adjourn. Is there a second? Second. I thought we might, yes. I already told them. Yeah, girls' soccer game, yeah. I thought, I have a motion on the floor, but I thought we might just stick around and do some practice budget articles for next spring's town meeting. Yeah. All those in favor of adjourning signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. Voted.